All right, first thing you're gonna do before you get to step one is you're gonna tape down your drawing. And then this is your homework, and that's what I'm gonna do right here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tape this down. Now, a couple things that I'm gonna do, I tend to try and line it up with at least one straight line. I've got a scale there that I want to keep straight. The scale looks like it's in line with that. So let's get it pretty close to that. The building's at an angle, so that's not going to help me. You know what? Watch this. I'm going to line it up with the building. No, I'm not. No, we're going to keep it simple on you. We'll line it up with this, and you'll have to learn how to draw angles with your triangle. All right, so get it lined up where you like it on your board. If you don't have a board, you can do this whole exercise without a drafting board. This one's, you'll use your triangles. You will need a triangle or straight edge of some type. You're gonna wanna tape it down. A couple pointers on taping it down. Most people when they want to tape down a drawing, will put their tape at an angle like this because they want to make sure it's nice and secure. You don't want to do that. You want to go straight across, and I'll tell you why. When you're using a drafting bar, when you bring the bar up, you'll notice that corner's up a little bit. Well, it'll grab it, and sooner or later it will pull it right underneath your bar and peel it right off your drawing. So I recommend that you don't do that. Put it straight across. And it's less inclined to grab a corner that way. Next, we're going to put a piece of trace on it. Now, I like your trace to have relatively straight edges. Suzanne used to get so worked up on this. If you're real good, I don't know how good I am anymore, there are some people that can just pop it off straight like that. I don't even do that, and I got lucky that time, but that's pretty good. A nice way to do it, take your triangular scale, lay it right in there, and there's a nice straight edge. And you'll get used to it. You want to put it over your drawing, and again, take down the corners in a straight line. Now, since my trace is bigger than the drawing, I like to have the bottom of it underneath the ruler so the ruler's not constantly banging into it. Now that we've spent an inordinate amount of time showing you how to tape down a drawing, let's go on to this. Block out the roof of any structures as well as hard-built edges. What do I mean by hard-built edges? Well, we'll take a look when we see it here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use my ultrafine Sharpie to start. I'm just going to go through and start doing the straight lines on the plan. I'm just tracing, but I'm trying to, you know, some of my lines aren't perfectly straight because I've given you a sketch. So I'm trying to fix any obvious mistakes that I see by eye. Notice the overlapping corners. Notice that the pen is starting to make hit-go-hit lines. And sometimes I'll even give it a little I'll go down and come back on it to give it a little gas there. I'm not sure what that's doing. Am I missing a lot? Oh, I see. All right, sorry. Okay, now for the house. I'll usually go in one direction. Notice that I'm right-handed, so I typically I start on the right and work to the left. And the reason I do that is so I don't drag my triangle through my ink work. Although with the fine point Sharpie, this one, the ultra fine, excuse me, not the fine point, the ultra fine Sharpie, it's actually pretty good about not smearing. All right, not guaranteed, but it does pretty well. So I go in one direction, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to go in the other direction. Now, inevitably, when you do this, you quite often find lines that you've missed. And you might come into spots on the drawing where you're like, I don't know what he's showing there. I'm not sure what that is. Guess what? Make something up. Take a guess. I'm not gonna, if it wasn't clear in the sketch, yeah, wing it. If it wasn't super clear in the sketch, that's okay. All right, I've done all the hard lines, although you can't even see that one, so we're gonna go over that one again. And now you can see it a lot. So I've done all the hard straight lines with the exception of the roads. Oh, no, I haven't. See, like I said, you always wind up missing one. All right, so next, so I've got the hard lines down that I wanted to get down. Next, block out any curvilinear hard lines. Here, the main curve lines are going to be this walkway, and you'll notice there are some straight lines on it. What I typically do is I'll draw my curves first, and I'll show you a good example. Like here on Sunset Avenue, I'm going to just draw a curve just at the curve, and maybe even stop it a little early. I'll do the curve. I'll do a curve. And the line's not particularly straight in this sketch, so you're going to have to... And you're going to see why I do this in a minute. Here we've got a big curve. That's going to be a problem. That's where those dots come in handy. And don't hesitate to use them. Especially on these big curves. Stop it in advance of the straight line. That's driveway. I'm trying to figure out what's going on in this drawing. Stop that. I think I've got all the curves. Now I want to connect these curves with straight lines, but I'm not going to go right up to the line. I'm going to leave a little break. I might put a dot there and make a straight line. I'll put a straight line there. I can put a dot in and make a straight line. Here I can put a dot on one end, but what I'm not doing is connecting right to the curve. And the reason why is if you draw a curve, I'm going to draw two curves. And I want to get lines going here from one curve to the other. So I want a straight line there. Now, if I try and connect the lines, what ultimately happens is you wind up with that blob right there. If that's the best you're going to get, and there's still a blob right there. Whereas if you put a dot in there, and maybe a dot there, and then just a break and a dot and a little line, now it's not a bug, it's a feature. And you don't get that extra thick line, it looks like you made a mistake. It's really difficult to tie one line into the next, you know, to do a continuous, you know, if I wanted to continue that line, how do I make it longer? You know, when you start it, you wind up with a hit, go, hit in the middle of the line, which is where you don't want it. So when you wind up in that scenario, be it on straights or curves, the dot, start again. Looks like you intended to do it. I've got this one, dot, dot. And I'm going to do something else a little later that will, and I don't like that curve, so let's finish that plus. In addition to that, you'll notice that some of my curves are a little heavier than the straight line because it's harder to draw a freehand line than to draw a curve, and none of that's going to matter later on in the drawing. I will quite often do what you just saw, which is I'll set my pen on the drawing and bring my equipment up to it, as opposed to trying to line it up with the equipment first. In the beginning, most folks struggle a little with the equipment. It seems to take too long and they'd rather do it freehand. I want you to use the equipment because the reality is it's quicker with the equipment than freehand. If it wasn't quicker with the equipment, and I'm not drawing that entire line in, I'll show you why in a minute. If it wasn't quicker with the equipment, trust me, all working drawings would be done freehand. It's just, we try to do it the fastest way possible. I'm going to go ahead and trace this scale now that I'm doing straight lines. And when I do my scale, I tend to do mine like this. You'll see in a second. Now, you can come up with other designs for scales, but I like them pretty simple like this. This is a graphic scale, and if we were to measure it, I think this is at 40th. We're going to find out in a minute. Oh, no, it's at some weird scale. No, it's at 50th. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 feet. 0, 20, 40, 80. Don't write any labels on your plan yet. And we won't be writing any labels on your plan at all because you're going to do all that in GIMP at some later point in life. All right, we've done the curvilinear built forms. We've drawn all our curves in. We've connected them. Block out trees and plantings. Now, here I blocked out most of them for you already. But what we're going to do, you notice this says wooded. So there's different ways to draw big areas with trees on them. I have a way, and it's a pain, but we're going to do it. You can just draw a line like I show on that plan and try and indicate that it's a wooded area. I like to do individual trees. If you have a circle template, this is where you're going to want to use it. And what I would recommend is you lightly, and we can erase these will get erased later, start blocking out a couple big ones, and I recommend hanging a few over your property line. And you'll see why in a minute. Try to be irregular with this. Maybe put a big one right on the edge, and I'll throw a big one. Now I'm going to work it down to something smaller. I'll put another one there. And another one here. I'm going to bump up to the edge of this in a minute. I'm going to try and vary the size of them, but what I'm doing is I'm trying to ultimately get clumps of trees which we talked about a little. If you can avoid putting a tree in the corner of the property line, that's probably to your benefit, and you'll see why later on. All right, let's throw another one. It looks kind of lonely there. I'm going to go with some smaller ones. And what I'm going to try and do is define the edge of the trees just by other trees. So there's the edge of the woods. We'll make a clump there. We'll turn that one into a clump, and we'll tie it into that one. And we're going to draw over all of these trees, one at a time. Won't that be fun? All right. It's crying for something right here. Let's give it something. All right, that's pretty good. If you looked at trees from above, you know, when I say wooded area, there tends to be little breaks in it, and if you're walking through the forest, you've seen the little breaks. The other trees I've already got defined. You don't have to trace those over. Next, I've got profile buildings and major items. In this case, the only thing I'm going to profile is the building. So I'm going to break out the fat Sharpie. I'm going to try and get one that's got a nice, I like a nice new one with a sharp. You'll have new ones. Over time, let's see if this appointment, that one's okay. Over time, they get progressively duller and less pointy. And in the beginning, they're real pointy and real juicy, which is a double-edged sword. I like the point part of them for my profiles because the profiles won't get super thick. The juicy can be a problem. There's a period where it's just pointy enough and not that pointy, not too juicy. That lasts for about 4 lines, and then it's probably too blunt and just right for juice. You just can't win.
Like
what I'm doing,
It's like a turkey.
Yes, yeah. There's no easy answer. It's like being busy at work. I go through 2 periods of being either I'm swamped and I'm behind and I'm in trouble, or I've got nothing and I'm scared because I have no work. There's a 2-week period in there where I've got just the right amount of work for the right amount of time, but I don't realize it till 2 weeks after I'm in it. And then I look back and I go, you know, I was just busy enough then, and now I'm dead. So, all right. What I do, if you've noticed when I'm drawing ink lines with my triangles, this, if you want to, did everybody see what the beveled edge was?
Yeah.
All right. You want to get the beveled edge, see I put the groove down. But you'll notice I also pick up my triangle like that. And that means this one isn't beveled. All right, so if you tilt your triangle up like that, you're going to avoid a potential problem, which I may or may not be able to create. Let's see, let me get my profile lines down before I mess up my triangle. And if you keep it tipped like that, you can do what I just did, which is go back over this line. If you remember with the ultrafine Sharpie, no problem. Takes it a while to dry. So it's real important that you go in one consistent direction, like from left, I tend to work from right to left because I'm right-handed. I tend to work from top down. So you're not dragging equipment through it. But if you keep it at an angle like this, you can get away with going back and getting lines that you missed to some degree. And if you'll also notice that my triangle isn't right on the line. I have to leave room for the pen. And for you folks, you know, putting the pen right on there and bumping the triangle up to it is a nice technique to get that right. Okay, I've gone around one direction, the outside of the building. I let it sit for a few seconds, or else that's going to happen. You can give it a little air to freshen it up. Now I'm going to go and do the rest of it. Same thing, I like tilting my triangle up, and the reason I like doing that, and I don't know if I can get it to fail, but I will try in a minute. Notice the professional dots. Notice the breaks in the, well, there's not many breaks in these lines because they're pretty small. But I do throw a dot or two on the end. I love throwing dots on the end of my profile lines. I'm just going around the perimeter of the building. Throw another dot in there. And why do I do that? Well, let's try something here. Okay, you can kind of see where we're headed with this. All right, so the profile line just lifts the whole building up, but I just went around the perimeter. I didn't do any of the interior lines. The reason why I tend to tilt up the triangle, especially if I don't have a beveled edge, I don't know if I can get it to do it. I won't. It's not so much with sharp, there you go. All right, see that little, if you're right next to it, sometimes when you pull the triangle, sometimes it will actually, you'll get capillary action, it will just suck it out and make a nice round blob. And you'll watch it happen, and that's sad. If you keep it at an angle like that, you won't get that problem. And I never tend to do this, where I'm drawing with the point of the pen right in at the bottom. If anything, I tend to point the pen away from my equipment. These lessons you will learn, albeit painfully, when you post your drawings next week and say, there's false smudges, it did this. All of a sudden there were blobs all over it. You'll get better at it. All right, profile buildings and major items. Finished trees and plantings. All right, this is the cheap tree. I showed it to you before. Why wait? So what I do, I've got my tree blocked out below. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a line, a W stroke, a line, a W stroke, a W stroke, a line, a W stroke, a line, a W stroke, and you're going like, what the hell is a W stroke? What a W stroke is this. It's just a little W. But if you connect two lines with it, that's what you wind up with. Just a little character technique. And I'm going to go around. See how I've got clumps of trees? I'm just going around the outside edge of the clump. I'm not drawing each tree. It's not a profile line, but I'm just going around the outside edge. This is going to take a while because of all those trees I drew in the forest. But I'm going to try and do some of it fast. And notice I'm doing overlapping lines, which isn't a problem. I'm going to go ahead and put dots in the center. Yeah, we'll do this one. Ooh, I missed some lines there. I can fix that. And feel free, if you have a question while I'm doing this, shout it out. With a lot of these things, the faster you go, the nicer it looks. In the beginning, not so much. But as you get used to it, you want to work fast and loose because the loose aspect is what people enjoy about the drawings. I'm going to do a different type of tree for those. And if you remember, I didn't draw that solid line through that because I knew there was a tree going there. Now I'm copying over some of the ones I traced and put in there to make my edge of the forest. You'll get good at doing these trees, or whatever one you choose to do, but I would like to see you master doing this cheap W tree, because trust me, it can be a lifesaver. I can show you a couple more after, but people get carried away with trees. And I have a reason that's a big old clump. You know, we're not looking at it being razor precise. If you glitch up a little line, it actually makes it look more tree-like. Remember, just trying to go around the outside edges of the clump. Straight line W, straight line W, straight line W. Now, granted, it would have been faster if I just did a wiggly line at the end of the tree line than doing what I'm doing, but I just think it looks better this way. And people know exactly what's going on back there. Now, I've done, when you're doing your work, it quite often you can go on Google Earth or Google Maps and get some nice satellite views of the property that you're working on, which is helpful if there's abutting woods, and you can draw these clumps in relatively accurately. Just watch the clump. You'll see the clumps from the sky, and just draw your circles in and getting close. But this is why I like these cheap trees, is because you can fill up a lot of area fast with them. And is that the last one? I find myself doing this a fair amount of time. You're going to want to keep a scrap of white paper available for you to do the same thing. Just to see what I got going on. It doesn't look bad. Doesn't look like I'm missing anything yet. There are a couple trees around. Hey, get back in line. All right, I've got a couple little trees in through here that I said I was going to do different. I'm going to do, I call it my poodle tail tree. My poodle tail tree is just a bunch of W strokes right around the perimeter. And I'll do a little blow up of this in a minute. Now, I also tend to put a dot in the middle of my trees, which when you're doing planting plans, which I won't be going through, you'll learn how to do planting plans sooner or later. I just think that the dot, one, it kind of hints at a trunk, and two, it's going to come in handy for what I'm about to do to these trees. Get close to the middle. You don't have to measure it out. Dot, 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 dot. All right, so dot, 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 dot. All right, so the next step, the way you do the cheap tree, you trace around the circle. I'm going to do a single individual tree. So you go around the circle with straight lines and W's. You put a dot in the center. You then do 5 or 6 lines radiating out, or 7 or 8, you can decide, from the center of the tree. Couple things to note about what I just did. 1, they're hit-go-hit lines. You need to do that. 2, they go all the way past the edge of the tree. They're loosey-goosey. 3, they're not totally symmetrical. So, and when I say they're not in a pattern, that is a terrible line. That's okay. This is what I don't want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I like a couple that are close together. I can fix this. Put a couple close together, keep a couple far apart, and that's not bad. You can, but don't do, I don't want them to look like starfish. You can, if you're really bored, and especially with big trees, preferably round big trees, but I'm just eyeballing it. I mean, you can do this. Okay, you can go halfway up the branch and put a little jog and go out. A little jog and go out. And put a little branch on there. These are fun. I don't tend to do this, but they make kind of a cool tree. And then you can do it again. You put a little L and then go straight out towards the edge of the tree. And if you want to do that forever, you wind up with this kind of weird star pattern in the tree. And it's graphically fine. And as long as you're retired and have a year between assignments, you can do every tree like this. But I don't, but you can kind of start to see the star going there, and if you work it even further, you can get, it'll be even more star-like. You put a jog in it, bring the branch, come out. I don't do this ever because it just takes, I used to, but faster's better. It's okay. That's my cheap tree, and that's the one I use. This tree takes color well, so now I got to go through and do that to every one of these trees, which should go fairly quickly. And you'll notice what I'm going to do, especially in this case where I've got a big tree in the clump over some little trees, I tend to do the big tree first, and then just throw a couple little trees in there underneath. Big tree. For my poodle tail trees, which are done, plus when you do this, you'll notice what happens is you aim at that dot, you make this bigger dot, which is kind of like the trunk of the tree. But you're not really making anything. It's just your hit go. When you put 7 hit go hit lines on top of one another, that's what happens. And I like to, again, put a couple close together and then a couple not so close together. Just random. You're trying to get this random flare for it. I don't want them all to look the same. And if you do it loose enough and fast enough, again, I've made at least 60 mistakes on these trees, but who cares? It just helps. And I know I would like you all to do your trees this way for the woods. You could use the practice on the trees. Sure, why not? We'll just go crazy. I mentioned my poodle tail trees. When I'm done putting all the stems in on these bad boys, or the branches, whatever you want to call them, I'll show you what my poodle tail is. I like simple trees. I don't like a lot of ink on the trees, a lot of black ink, because what you'll find, although putting a lot of detail on the trees and plan makes a nice black and white plan, as most of ours are going to wind up getting colored, it'll get too dark. So the less lines, the simpler they are, they tend to take color better later on, and we can define the tree very well with color, which you'll learn about in a few weeks. It's kind of therapeutic, and you can, this is a fun thing to do instead of just doodling squiggles. If you're on the phone talking to someone and bored and you want to doodle, or you're in some of those classes where you find that you're really not listening. I shouldn't say that. You should listen in all of your classes. But if you find the inclination to doodle and they won't let you surf the web on your phone in class, which I'm supposed to give you a lecture about, don't surf the web on your phone in class or the school computers, unless I tell you to. If I tell you to Google it, it's okay. All right, I think I got all of them. I don't put stems on the poodle tails. I'll show you my poodle tail tree in a minute. And you can see it's starting to read. The poodle tail tree is pretty simple. That tape is not simple. There we go, I'm sure that'll help. I am going to put down a circle for this one. All I'm doing, there's your circle. W, W, W. Just make W's pointing out from the circle. And call it good. It's kind of a nice little tree, and it looks like the tail of a poodle. A smiling poodle that looks more like a cat. I don't know what that looks, kind of like a schnauzer, but that's all right. There, it's a poodle with a very big tail. So I call that poodle tail trees. Let's go to our next step. We've got our trees all blocked out. And then next on the hit parade, double line edges. All of your hard surfaces, and I forgot hard surfaces. Remember I said I missed a line? I missed a couple. I've got a walkway going into the house, which would be a light line. If I can get my pen to consider it right. And I've got a curve going in front of these trees. I'm not going to question what that noise was. I think my screen might have shut down, which means I have to jump on top of the table again because someone stole the remote. All right, so what I want you to do is wherever a hard surface meets a soft surface, I say wherever, but for the most part, wherever a hard surface meets a soft surface, I want you to go around it and do a line and a W stroke. And I'm just going to stick a white piece of paper under there so you can see what's happening better than without it. And as to what this represents, it's just more of a graphic touch. You can think of it as like the edge of grass coming up to the edge of pavement. But it's just more for graphic. It kind of, what I've found it does There's that. And the W's aren't, some of my W's are U's. Some of my W's are going one way, some are going the other. It's just a line with character in it. Not being particularly precise. Some places it's far away, other places it's right up to it. I don't draw it through the trees. If it's getting really muddy, I don't want to go crazy with it. And I'm even going to do a little around this because yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. That's under the trees. All right, and you can see it makes the lines read a little better, but they're there. All right, so that's the hard surface with the W stroke. Next step, we're up to like 7 of 24. Add shadows to buildings and trees. All right, when you're doing shadows, this is where it gets weird. Typically, when you do a plan, north is up on the plan, which means here's north, and if you're looking from above, the sun tends to come from the south, which means everything would cast a shadow up the page. We don't want to do that. We want the shadows down and to the right. Why is that? Well, I have theories, because I have theories about many things. What you're basically doing, for example, on this tree, I'm putting a shadow down and to the right. I'm assuming the sun is coming from up into the left. Why we do that, I don't know for certain, but I have a theory, and that theory is when we read from the left to the right, and we read from the top to the bottom. Our eye tends to travel a page, upper left-hand corner down to the right. When you put this shadow there down, it stops your eye and it brings it back into the drawing. What you can do is, because, and people will ask, well, it's never going to cast shadows there. We're not doing fully accurate shadows. These aren't an accurate shadow study. I don't want, you could plot out where this building would create a shadow and how long it would be at any particular given time of day, depending on the angle of the sun. And we don't need to do that. This is totally graphic. I'm going to start with the buildings, and I want to go down and to the right. And all I'm doing is I'm going to put a fat line down and to the right. It's pretty simple. It's kind of like another profile line. There's pretty much all my lines to the right. And now, see there I put it on, I laid it on thick, and you can even see it shining, which means it's dying to smear. With any luck, I let it dry enough. Now, I want you to see what happened to that building. It's hard to say if you can remember what it did before. I might as well just take this piece of tape off. It's beginning to bug me now. You can kind of see it lift off the page because it's creating the shadow. So we've got the shadow down and to the right. The sun's coming from up and to the left, and we've cast our shadows down and to the right. I showed it. Now comes the fun part, trees. Now trees, I don't need to use my equipment for. Trees, I'm just going to go ahead and watch what happens to like this clump of trees when I simply compare those trees to every other tree on there. It makes them stand out. And that's why we do it. Now, it's not an accurate shadow. I mean, it might be a kind of accurate shadow of the tree at noon. But it's, again, it's more for graphic purposes to pop the tree out. I felt a smudge there. I don't see it. Did it come out? I felt my finger hit it, but it's still sticky. Okay, these guys, I'm just going to put a little bit, just hint at it. A little stipple on there, because if I put a big fat line like that, it'd be bigger than the trees. Now, if you're lost for where to put the shadows, you can do a little trick, because we all like little tricks. You'll get used to doing this. Miss any? Ah. All right, and notice how now all of a sudden they lift off the page. It's the shadows are real important on this. Add texture. What on earth is texture? Well, texture is, you can add roof texture, but we're not gonna. We're gonna leave the building blank, even though I might say, nope, deck lines, grids, ground texture, add roof texture, strike that. You're not gonna need to add roof texture. Texture is some of these little lines that just separate different items and let you know. For example, I'm going to put a grid on this concrete patio. Now before, you might have looked at this and not really known that this was a concrete patio. But if I put the grid on it, it's going to start reading more like a concrete patio. I'm going to be fast with the line. Oh, that's a little too fast. I'm going to try and be fast and loose with the lines. I'm going to make sure I've got that overlap in there. Don't hesitate to break the lines in spots. And now you're starting to hint, you can kind of see that that's a paved walkway. But you'll notice I got a lot of broken lines, and it's a very loosey-goosey line. I've got some more paving up here, although I'm not really sure. Oh, that's driveway. I don't know what that is. Oh, I think I drew an extra line through my driveway, but guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna turn that all into a walkway. That was probably a mistake, but that's okay. We like mistakes.
Happy accidents. Please don't slap me.
Now, another thing you can do is you don't have to put the grid all the way through it. You can kind of aim for the corners and just do a little. And when you're doing texture, and just pick a couple spots, and that kind of hints at it. All right, I could have put the grid all the way through like I did back here, but I put a little here, I skipped it, and I put it. So I aim for the ends and the corners. Another place for texture, I wouldn't put the circles in the pool, just leave the pool alone. Another place for texture is on the roads and paved areas. This one's tricky. I usually put a little tiny circle. I try and put a little tiny circle and then like 3 dots. This is stippling, but I don't put a lot in there because if you put too much in, I love stippling, by the way. I used to do whole drawings, just stippling. Stippling is just simply the art of making dots. That's called stippling. And you can do whole photographic copies of drawings just like that. Was it Montserrat? I don't know. There was an artist that used to do pointillism and he used to do it in color. But you'll notice I try and, what you want to do with stippling is you don't want to do what I did right there. You know, this, aside from taking forever, it's too regular. I don't want to see, when I look at that, I'm not looking at the texture, I immediately see this square that it created. Whereas if I do this, clump a few together, move a few out, it's kind of tough to find an edge to it. We don't want to find an edge to it. The problem with doing it to that level on the pavement is it starts looking like your pavement has a 5 o'clock shadow. It does. It's a nasty look. So what you do, aim for the corners. Immediately look at the corners, make a dot, put somewhere between 3 and potentially 5 dots. Clump a few by the dot and then spread them out. All right. Stop at 5, or you will put a beard on your drawings, which we don't want.
What's wrong with beards?
The beards are fine, but not on your pavement. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is my grass lines. I don't think there's anything else I want to texture there. I just put my grids in, and yeah, it's good. Typically, you're going to have texture on the hard surfaces. However, I've got these grass lines. Now, I show these contour lines on here. You don't have to follow the contour lines, but you can. I call this my cheap grass. And I want you to look at this, and you'll see there's a lot of white space around this drawing. It's not looking bad, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do these loosey-goosey lines. I'm going to make sure they go beyond the property line. And they don't have to follow exactly what I did for the other lines. You can if you want to. You know, if you've got a contour plan, you could follow what the contours of the land were. I'll leave that up to you. I'm kind of doing it here. I'm not drawing them through the trees, but I am drawing them between the trees. I'm going to carry them out. We got another one here. Well, even if we don't have one there, we're going to have one there now. Notice I'm going beyond the property line, outside the edges of all this. There's so many lines here. I'm just going to make one up now. Okay, once I've drawn all those lines in, this is known as cheap grass. Doesn't look like much there, but all of a sudden you're starting to see more action go on. Now I'm going to go, and I'm going in the opposite direction of the lines, and I'm putting kind of fast. And then, so I do one band, and then in the next band, I do a couple more lines, but I don't line them up with the lines behind them. So I'm kind of alternating, but I'm not doing them super regular. Again, overlap, throwing a couple dots. You kind of get a feel for it, and in the beginning, this is going to seem kind of tricky. It's just a nice, cheap, quick graphic technique to fill up a lot of blank area on your page, but it adds something to it. And I just call it my cheap grass. Throw in a couple double lines and then a single line. Throw in a single line, then a couple double lines. A couple more. We'll put one there. We'll put one there. And now all of a sudden, you know, it doesn't look as empty anymore. It filled that right up, and you can kind of see there's something going on other than a hard surface or a tree. Next step, Again, 8 to 24. We don't have 24 steps. Add a property line. Actually, we only have 10 steps. So, and we're not going to do number 10. Property line. I've got a property line shown on the tree. Graphic scale, north. All right, we'll get to that. Actually, we are going to do parts of 10. I do my property line on my fat Sharpie. And what you do, don't go through the trees. I hung the trees out of the property line for a reason, and you're going to see, hopefully, what that reason is. I love doing property lines on my drawings. It's much like doing a profile line. I'm trying not to go through trees. Lord knows I have. Property line typically is this line, a dot, a line. It's a little more regular than the professional dot. But I mean, again, it doesn't have to be measured with precision. I like to have kind of strategically placed breaks in the line. That was bad. I don't like that, but there's nothing I can do about it. All right, notice how that just framed the whole drawing? But I got these little trees hanging out. So the problem, who did the frame on their pictures that it looks so good?
That was me, I believe.
Yeah, okay, and it looked great. You did a good job with it. But if you do the frame, the problem with the frame on the picture, it's almost like you're looking through a window. And it doesn't, by doing this, it sucks you into the drawing. Instead of making a wall around the drawing, this wants to draw your eye into it. So that's why I don't do a typical rectangular frame, but I do frame every drawing I do. And you'll learn more about how I would frame your sketches a little later on in the class. But the property line tends to frame it. The last thing I would put on here would be a north arrow. And I say, you know, title your drawing. We're not going to do, I don't want you doing any hand lettering. And you're going to see why later on. So with this one, I have a north arrow that I use. Again, north is typically up on a drawing. There's no law that says it has to be, but people tend to think it will be. I just tend to draw a circle with my template. I put a line through the middle of it. There are a bunch of north arrows out there, but this is the one I like. It's just simple. It's just an arrow pointing up. Now I'm going to go ahead and label this, but all I'm going to put on it is, oh, there's another thing I do. See how this road kind of dribbles off into nowhere? I would typically do this with a light line. I would just cut the roads off. You don't have to, but it, again, the whole goal is your eye looks for corners and ends. So if your eye's following this and there wasn't that line there, you just go, well, I'm not interested in the drawing anymore. So if it looks at that, you tend to want to go back into the drawing. I'd like to think we'd all agree that this, aside from all this nonsense, including a bad dog, looks better than, if I can find it, what we originally started with. You know, but these are the kind of sketches you might get from your boss, or you might get from a client. All right, but I mean, what's the client going to be more excited about if they see this versus that? They both say the same thing, but this version is going to really make them excited about the project.